All right, a lot raised around the economy at this gathering, and I have joining me on the program live, senior economist at STIRS, Dumebi Oluwole. Good afternoon. It's really good to see you. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Good afternoon.
Yes, I think it's good to start on the positive note. In recent times, we've been hit with price of fuel, price of energy, and all of that back to back. But now we see that our crude production is improving, something that we've talked about, what it means for our economy at this very challenging time. How does it come to you?
So I'll start off with the fact that, again, we're still in the reform era. Right, so that's why we're seeing a lot of these upward changes rather in the prices of a lot of commodities that are subsidized. So from energy to petrol to electricity, right? We're seeing a lot of these price increases, and this is not too far-fetched from what is happening in other countries that are also experiencing reforms, especially countries that are under IMF programs like Egypt and Kenya as well. Recently, Egypt, increased electricity tariffs by about 40%, and that happened after a 300% increase in subsidized bread, right? So, African countries that are undertaking reforms are significantly feeling the brunt of, higher commodity prices, especially with subsidized products like energy and energy primarily. So, speaking on the increase in oil production, that is definitely some good news because right now I would say from the reports that we're getting from OPEC and also the NUPRC, we've seen about a 3-month consecutive increase in oil production for Nigeria. While this is good news, we've also seen the news recently from the NNPC as well, and we also know about crude swap agreements, meaning that some of this oil production that we're seeing, some of this oil that we're producing have already been locked in forward contracts, meaning that this oil will be used to pay some of the country's debt, right? So while this is good news, until we know a few things, number one, that those forward contracts that the country has locked itself in using crude oil, until we know that those agreements have been fully paid off. While it's good news to be happy about that oil production is increasing, we also need to be sure that this oil that is coming out of the ground and increase in oil production that we're seeing will have a positive multiplier effect on the economy. And what that positive multiplier effect looks like is an increase in refined petroleum products, right? So the other thing that, I think additionally, before I move on to the next point, apart from the increase in refined petroleum products, the other thing that would obviously be beneficial to the economy is an increase in foreign exchange through export earnings if we begin to see a consistent increase in crude oil production, right? Then more importantly, we also need to consider what our budget for the year was anchored on. So Nigeria's oil production at 1.35 million barrels per day is not where we used to be in terms of, I would say at the beginning of the year where we were producing about 1.1, 1.2. We're obviously doing a bit much better, but our budget was anchored on an oil production estimate of around 1.6 million barrels per day. So meaning that we're still short, right, of what the government will need to actually meet its fiscal obligations. And if that is the case, we obviously still find ourselves in a situation where the government will not be generating enough money to meet its budget obligations, and that obviously increases the need for borrowing. The other aspect to also consider is the OPEC production quota for Nigeria, which is 1.5. Now, as small as that number might seem, when you look at what Nigeria was producing some 2000 or even in the 2010s, right, you will see that Nigeria's production now is significantly lower at that time when we're producing about 2 million barrels per day on average, right? As of what we have right now, that is still lower than OPEC's production estimate. So what this basically points to when you look at our budget estimate and OPEC's production quota, what this simply means is that we're not earning enough to break even to meet our fiscal obligations for the year. So while it is good news, we still have to consistently put put it in context for Nigeria's public finances and what that means for the general economy.
I like that understanding. We need to put things in perspective so that people understand proper context, like you said. We've been talking about ramping up production, and you mentioned how that can help improve local refining. You know what's been happening this back and forth with regards to pricing and all of that. While not mentioning names specifically, but I just want us to talk about how do we make sure that the local refineries get products from the NNPCL. Now, you mentioned the issues of commitments made by these IOCs and all of that. So how do we put all of these side by side?
So I think it's a very straightforward answer. It's good. You produce, you supply your domestic refineries, you produce the refined petroleum products, and you supply your domestic economy. So it's pretty straightforward, right? I don't think that the NNPCL or even those running the refineries, from the Port Harcourt refinery to the other modular refineries, are not aware of what needs to be done. We know that the major problem Nigeria faces today is, number one, the fact that we're not producing enough to supply, all of these refineries. And the issue with that, it's pretty obvious. And even in our 2023/2024 fiscal year, it was accounted for, right? All theft, vandalism, all of those things that are not allowing us produce enough crude oil, right? When it comes to refining, I think it's important that we internalize the fact that economic development issues always start with a value addition mindset, right? So it's when you look at it that it's not just oil right now that is facing this problem of low value addition, right? Almost all agricultural commodities in Nigeria face this exact same problem. And you see that it's a development culture that has not been internalized from the top of the head of the economy up until even the bottom, right? So where you now see a lot of this, where you now see a lot of value addition happening is just primarily with the private sector, and yet the business environment is not still enabling enough for them to do this at large scale, right? So again, just to simply answer your question, I think it's very straightforward. It's not a difficult answer. We produce enough oil. If Nigeria is ready to take off the global stage and even take up the regional market for supplying, meeting its domestic demand for crude oil, which is now around, for meeting its domestic demand for refined petroleum products, which is around about 40 million barrels per day on average. If we're able to meet that, we obviously know that we have other markets that we can supply. We've heard the issue so many times about smuggling of Nigeria's petroleum when prices were so much lower to other neighboring countries, right? So if we know that there's a market for what we can produce, if we do take it seriously and we actually begin to do the work of producing enough crude oil to now ensure that we improve our value addition by ensuring that our refineries are actually doing what they're supposed to do. And just to mention in that regard, these refineries, they're running, but they're not running optimally, simply because we do know that we do know that salaries are being paid to those refineries. We do know that there are certain debts that some of these refineries have also, incurred over the years, even though they were not producing anything. Their cost of operations are still as high, right? So meaning that these refineries are operating, they are running, but they're not just producing what they should be producing, right? So making sure that there's some level of accountability for the refineries that are running, so that the government is not just incurring recurrent expenses that are not having any positive impact on the economy. So I guess there's that balancing effect that has to come into play here.
Brilliant stuff there. Well, let's delve into the FX market, which of course relates with exports. If we can do more of exports, we'll be able to balance trade. CBN is trying to inject, let me use that word, liquidity into that space, and also bringing in the BDC guys. I'm sure they'll be the registered BDC guys according to their new laws and all of that. But what do you make of it, as that today the greenback is still, is still going higher? It's about 1,006 something in some cases. How does that come to you? What do you think? What do you make of all of this?
All right, I'll start by setting a little context here before we talk about what the CBN is trying to do right now. So whenever countries take up reforms, it is almost always standard that the countries take a beating for it, right? Simply because there's a lot of uncertainty, and market expectations are often bearish until they see a certain level of stability with how the reforms have taken place. So if the reforms are going on and they're not seeing a certain level of stability, the currency will keep taking a hit. And putting that side by side, the fact that the global interest rate environment was very high up until, will I say, a month ago, that as well strengthens the US dollar, right? So meaning that other emerging market currencies, including the Naira, were also definitely going to, experience downward currency pressures. And that's some of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of issues, or not issues now, I'll say a lot of pressure on the Naira. But then now setting it in the domestic context, we know that dollar illiquidity has been a major issue for Nigeria. What are the key sources of dollar revenue for the country? Number one, we have oil exports, and we do know what has been happening with oil exports from the trade report that came out for the second quarter of the year and even the first quarter of the year. We do know that oil export earnings have not been so substantial. Then you also look at non-oil export earnings. While those are also rising, it's still not substantial because we're seeing that currency pressures is significantly affecting output of these industries and then affecting their ability to export and then generate enough dollar revenues. Same thing as well is happening with remittance inflows, right? And as well as capital inflows coming into the country. We've seen a significant increase in FPI inflows, but remember, that is hot money, and for a currency to actually be really stabilized over a long period of time, and by long period of time, we're looking at a period of 3 to about 10 years, we need stable investments coming in, and that's FDI inflows, and we've not seen a significant uptick in FDI inflows. And what that tells us is that investors are still very cautious of Nigeria's economy. Now, what the CBN is trying to do at the moment is step in, right? And it is not wrong for the CBN to step in whenever reforms like this have taken shape in an economy, simply because there are times where these interventions are necessary to stabilize the market, especially when you consider the fact that Nigeria does have high forex demand, and there are peak periods for this. When you look at the period of July up until the beginning of September, you would see a lot of increase in summer travel, increase in forex demand for summer travel. When you're going towards the end of the year, you also see an increase in forex demand for companies that are trying to build up their inventory, to meet up with the festive demand or festive sales, rather. So basically what the CBN is trying to do is intervene using the various structures that it has put in place to ensure that there's still price discovery. One of the things the CBN has done is, number one, sell forex to be the registered and licensed BDCs. What this is supposed to do is ensure that there's FX supply to meet individual, forex demand, right? And the price that the CBN has given, the BDCs is just to ensure that there's certain level of that there is no arbitrage, basically. That while the BDCs are going to be able to make certain level of profit, people are not paying more for a dollar using so much naira than they would have, used normally. The other option the CBN has also taken up, which one of it happened in August, is the retail Dutch auction, where they decided to service bulk FX demand backlogs from commercial banks, and these commercial banks are also servicing other businesses and even also BTA and PTA FX demand. So basically what the CBN is doing is not out of the norm for what it's supposed to be doing, especially when reforms have taken place like this. It's just simply to ensure that, number one, they positively anchor exchange rate expectations, and number two, they ensure that there is certain level of price stability when it comes to the forex market in Nigeria.
I like that. Now, before I let you go, we understand the fact that there's always a fallout when there are reforms, and that's what we are facing at this moment as a country. You've identified that. Now, managing this fallout is also very important. What do you think can be done so that people can start to get to understand that, yes, there should be light, or there is light at the end of the tunnel?
I would say I would split the answer to this question in two parts, right? So monetary policy we already see what the CBN is doing. They are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? They're communicating, they're using forward guidance to anticipate inflationary risks, and are keeping interest rates high to ensure that, money supply induced inflation is in check. They're also ensuring that, we have a certain level of financial stability across the, commercial bank, so that there's no ruckus, for lack of better words, right now, and just basically trying to keep inflation and exchange rate expectations in check. But the bulk of the work, when you look at, number one, the reasons why Nigeria's inflation is running at bay, you also consider some of the reasons why our dollar inflows, especially from export earnings, are not as high. You realize that the bulk of the work sits within the fiscal side of the economy. And what does this look like? We know that there are issues with insecurity that's affecting Nigeria's agricultural productivity. We know that farmers need, adequate storage facilities to ensure that there's a significant reduction in post-harvest losses that are about 50%, of almost all the commodities that Nigeria produces today. We know that they need fertilizers, things like this, and all of this sits within the purview of fiscal authorities. Number two, whenever reforms have taken place, right, social safety nets are non-negotiable, especially to the most vulnerable, right? And up until now, we still don't know how many of those, vulnerable Nigerians are existing. We do know that about 60% of Nigerians are multidimensionally poor, but some are poorer than others, and they are domiciled in certain states. So we're supposed to have a conditional cash register. While that does exist, we don't see updates to it regularly. So all of that communication gap from the fiscal authorities on how social transfers or social safety nets are being disbursed is not yet out there, right? And all of that communication gap is not anchoring, inflation and investor or even consumer expectations positively. And so these are some of the things that are priced negatively on Nigeria's economy and Nigeria's growth prospects. Even the IMF has clamored for this, and the IMF and World Bank have clamored for this as well, to ensure that social safety nets are disbursed and there is proper transparency on what is going on there. The third thing as well is on Nigeria's public finances, right? We do know that oil right now is Nigeria's current mainstay, and most of Nigeria's foreign exchange comes from oil exports. So proper visibility and transparency with what is going on with Nigeria's oil production, how the government is intensifying efforts to ensure that they completely eradicate insecurity and theft and vandalism that is affecting Nigeria's ability to produce enough oil. We need proper visibility on that. Let's know what is going on. And we need to also see positive impact in that regard. So Nigeria's oil production can at least reach up to the OPEC's production quota and be sustained at that level for a certain period of time, so Nigeria can actually realize a lot of gains. And the last thing I would mention now is meaningful government spending. Over time, we've seen that we haven't seen government spending in lucrative aspects of the economy. Yes, we're seeing an increase in minimal increases in capital expenditure, but we are still also seeing, for lack of better words now, I will say frivolous government spending on aspects of the economy that really do not have positive multiplier effects to ensure that Nigeria achieves the growth that it should be achieving as a developing economy or as emerging markets. And not until both the international community, domestic businesses in Nigeria, long-term investors begin to see prudent and meaningful government spending on lucrative aspects of the economy, there will still be that bias on how, even if Nigeria gets some money, there will still be that bias on how they will spend the money basically to ensure that we do achieve the growth prospects that we're supposed to achieve. So I would say those are the four key things in that regard. And once we begin to see some improvements in how the fiscal authorities are, number one, communicating, number two, being transparent, and number four, spending appropriately, would likely see some more positive impacts on Nigeria's economy.
Brilliant stuff. Dumebi Oluwole, senior economist. Thank you so much for starting the show for us today. Do enjoy your day and have a great one.
Thank you. You too.